Hi guys, this is vf.miniatures Warhammer Tactics series, and today I would like to discuss 5 strong and underrated units from the Codex Space Marines. This won't be a video about the units that we all know are great, like Vanguard Vets or the Redemptor Dreadnoughts or Inceptors, stuff like that. We will talk about units that usually go unnoticed by most of the players, and they deserve much more than that. And if you're interested in topics like that, I have a video called 5 units that you should avoid in Codex Space Marines, so if you are interested, go check it out. And without further ado, let's start. And the first unit on our list will be the Gladiator Reaper. I like all the Gladiator tanks, but honestly the Lancer doesn't put out as much firepower as we need for the price, and the Valiant is probably a bit on the expensive side. Plus, the Valiant provides that style of firepower, the heavy melter firepower that we can find someplace else in the Codex Space Marines. We have Dreadnoughts for that, we have Eradicators for that purpose, even Inceptors. But the Reaper does something that probably nobody else in the Codex can do, is provide you with a blanket of firepower, a bucket of shots. Namely 24 shots at strength 6 AP 1 or 2 if you're in Devastator Doctrine at damage 1, and 8 to 16 shots at strength 4 AP 1 or 2 depending on the Doctrine at damage 1 again. That strength 6 would be very useful, especially against Death Guard with their toughness 5 Terminators or Plague Marines, or if you're playing against the Drukhari or Craft Worlds that are going to be very prevalent on the tournament scene very soon. And Ginster cults that were released recently, or the Tyranids, they all going to be suffering from that mass strength 6 and strength 4 firepower. What I like as well about this tank is that it's a toughness 8 tank, and you can buy for 5 points the auto launchers that are basically adding this smokescreen keyword to your tank. So you can turn on -1 to hit when you are targeted, which is extremely useful, and it's why I think that having one Gladiator Reaper in your army is probably the best way to go. Because you need heavy shots to deal with the tough targets, and investing more than 215 points into mass anti-infantry, anti-light targets firepower is probably not a great idea. Plus this tank has the repulsor field keyword, so you can, if you want, shoot after falling back for 1 command point, or if you use it in your opponent's charge phase, you can subtract 2 from the charge rolls that target this tank, which is extremely useful and can save your tank in some clutch moments, especially when someone tries to charge it from dip strike, and making that 9-inch charge an 11-inch charge instead can make a big difference. The Gladiator Reaper, as all the tanks nowadays, doesn't have the core keywords, so you can't have any rerolls on this tank for any means but the stratagems or some special abilities that some characters or chapters may have. And it's a good thing, I think, because the best place for the Gladiator Reaper is in your back line, somewhere on the far objective in your deployment zone, where it's relatively safe from the opponent's firepower, and you can blast away at your leisure at whatever targets you need. Characters should be on the front lines, they should be supporting the combat elements of your army, slashing and hacking away at your enemies' war leaders, not babysitting tanks in your deployment zone. So I think it's good for the game and good for you tactically speaking, because otherwise it would be necessary to leave a couple of characters near the tank platform and we would be back in the 8th edition. So let's keep on playing the 9th. The best chapters for this tank are obviously the Iron Hands. With their 6-up shrug, they're ignoring, or should I say doubling, the amount of wounds for the purposes of the damage table, the 2 command point stratagem for full rerolls to hit on the tank, which is probably one of the few ways that you can actually get rerolls for this tank. And of course the Ironstone relic, or that you can put perhaps on the Tech Marine and leave this Tech Marine near the tank. to heal him up and provide the -1 damage throughout the game. And the second chapter that I think would be great for the Gladiator Reaper are, of course, the Black Templars, with their 5-up invulnerable save. They don't actually have anything, as far as I can remember, that can help this tank also, but the 5-up invuln, of course, is very, very important. Next up is the Ironclad Dreadnought. It's the only dedicated melee Dreadnought from the main core Space Marine Codex. There are some for the Space Wolves and for Blood Angels, but most of the chapters don't have a dedicated melee Dreadnought of their own. So what's great about the Ironclad? First of all, it's a toughness 8 Dreadnought, so the multi-meltas will only wound it on 4s, and the bolter weaponry of that sort and any strength 4 weapons will wound it on 6s, which is awesome. As any Dreadnoughts in our days, it has the core keyword, so eligible for all the buffs in the world. And what I also like about this Dreadnought, if you equip it with 2 close combat weapons, which you will do because you don't need those Hurricane Bolters, especially for extra 5 points, you will get innate rerolls 1 to hit in melee, which is incredibly great for something that should be relatively self-reliant. What about the close combat, you may ask? Well, this Dreadnought has 5 attacks at strength 12, AP 4 and damage 2d3, so minimum of 2 and maximum of 6. But if you are targeting vehicles with this weapon, it has damage characteristic of 6, flat 6 damage weapon. I'm not talking about this Seismic Hammer or the Dreadnought Ironclad combat weapon, because those are plainly and simply worse than the Dreadnought Chain Fist that I've just mentioned. Killing a Blight Lord Terminator on average with every single failed save and throw is a great profile. It also has the smokescreen keyword, so you can activate -1 to hit from ranged weapons whenever you need for 1 command point, the same as the Gladiator Reaper that we've talked about previously. It's a great ability to provide some extra layer of protection for the Dreadnought when he's in trouble. He's the perfect candidate for any stratagems that allow units to be put into outflank, dip strike or strategic reserves, and in the strategic reserves you can put him for 1 command point, which is also great. I see this Dreadnought being used as a sort of distraction Carnifex that you put into dip strike or reserves and provide some additional pressure wherever you need it, or simply dip strike this Dreadnought in the opponent's back lines for them to deal with. Best chapters for the Dreadnought are Deathwatch because of the Dominus Aegis relic that allows it to have a 5-up invuln, and the dip strike stratagems. The Black Templars for that same 5-up invuln, the Iron Hands because of the 6-up shrug and 1 command point stratagem for Wisdom of the Ancients to make this Ironclad a character and give him +1 attack, and the Space Wolves because again of the 1 command point outflank strat and the +1 to hit in combat. Hitting on 2's reroll on 1s is a damn reliable profile for a weapon like Dreadnought Chain Fist. Firestrike Servo-turrets, a very unconventional and controversial unit, but I think that it has a very nice place in some Space Marine lists. I believe that the Firestrike Servo-turret is a perfect candidate for that supporting firepower unit that sits in your backlines, sort of like the Gladiator Reaper that I've talked about previously. You should not think about the Firestrike Servo-turret in a sense of something like Eradicators that need to kill anything that you point them at, but more like something that blinks away at less protected units of your opponent's army whenever you need some extra firepower on your side. What I like about them also is that they come in units of 1 to 3, so it's very easy to fill out the heavy support slot. If you're running a Vanguard detachment, you can take, say, 2 units of 2 and have 4 of those on the table. If you have a battalion, you can take 3 units of 1 and have 3 individual units that will be harder to get rid of because your opponents will be wasting the shots if they target them with the the heavy anti-tank weapons. So the unit structure is great. The firepower is also not bad. I like that the Firestrike servo-turrets have ballistic skill of 2+, because attack marine is running them, as you can see in the picture, and they each have 6 shots at strength 7, AP 1 or 2 if you are in Devastator Doctrine, at damage 2, and they have 48 inches of range, which is also something I like. It's especially important for a unit that has a 3-inch move. They are not stationary like most of the artillery pieces in the Codex Space Marines and any other codexes, but the 3-inch move is obviously not that much. But with the 48 inches of range, I think that you will be able to reach out and touch anything that you need, as long as you deploy them carefully. Top save, toughness 5 and 5 wounds each, so they won't be very easy to get rid of. Unfortunately, they don't have the Primaris keyword, so you can't use transhuman on them. Probably it's because they are more of a vehicle. They actually are a vehicle and not a living, breathing space marine. But toughness 5 is okay and not that easy for the wound roll already. As you may have noticed, I have skipped the Twin Last Talon weapon option for the Firestrike servo-turrets, because for the price I believe that the range of this weapon should be at least 36 inches, and the 24 inches of range paired with the 3-inch move is not something that I would recommend to use. Plus the 130 points for each Firestrike servo-turret is, I believe, too much. 270 points for 3 of these is that sweet spot of price and value that I think many of the Space Marine lists can manage to accommodate. The best chapters are of course, Iron Hands, because of that same old 2 command point Wrathful Machine Spirit stratagem to reroll all hits, and if you are running a unit of 3 of these servo-turrets, you will be, of course, rerolling the hits from all the 3 turrets. And the Black Templars again for the 5-up-1. It's not that important in this case because the Firestrike servo-turret already has a 2-up save, so only weapons with AP4 will actually pull it through the 5-up-1 threshold, but it's always great to have the 5-up-1 on your side. Plus the Black Templars, as any other melee chapter, they actually really need those units to sit in the back line and shoot away at the opponent, so the Firestrike of servo-turret again is a great choice for them. The humble drop pod. I think that we've started to forget how great the drop pods are and why they're so great, and let me remind you of that. For 70 points you can dip strike essentially any 10-man Space Marine unit or 2 units of 5 Space Marines, or 1 Dreadnought with a wounds characteristic of 9 or less. And the greatest thing about that is that you can actually deep strike those units on the first turn. So before your opponent, for example, had time to put the buffs on their units, like Miasma of Pestilence or the Glamour of Zinch or any other protective spells or the abilities that are used in the opponent's command phase, in the command phase of the player in question. So you can put 2 squads of Devastators with 8 multi-melters, so 16 shots without cherubs, so probably 20 shots with the cherubs if you include them, and I would recommend to include them because they don't take up any space in the actual drop pod. They're probably flying somewhere in the drop pod while it's making its descent. Or you can put the 10 Vanguard Vets with shields and claws, so have a very reliable first turn charge, especially if you manage to put a chaplain there. For example, if you have a 9-man squad, you can put a chaplain there and use the commanding oratory 2 command point stratagem to turn on our favorite Canticle of Hate for the +2 to charges, so having that 7-inch charge from Dip Strike. That's very, very, very strong, and for 70 points I think that it's a great addition for any army. It actually solves many of the problems that the Space Marines have. Problems with the logistics of your combat units and problems of survivability of your shooting units. Like the Eradicators, for example, they are very powerful. I mean, their shooting is very, very strong. They can exterminate almost any unit with the right buffs, but they are foot slogging, so there are limited ways to protect them from the incoming firepower while they are getting into range. So that's what the drop pod helps you to solve. And one other quirk about the drop pod that I like is that it's actually a transport. So when you are dip striking, you must set this model up within 9 inches, or for example within 12 inches if you're playing against an army with infiltrators, say. But after you deploy that drop pod outside of 12, as per the infiltrators scrambler array ability, you can then disembark your units towards the enemy and still have a 9-inch charge if we are talking about, say, Vanguard veterans. So that's the way you can actually counteract some of the deep strike denying abilities that your opponent's army may have. The only thing that you should be aware of is units charging drop pods will be basically protected from any shooting until you actually go and charge them yourself, because the drop pod is immovable, so you can't fall back with the drop pod. So anything that isn't stuck in combat with it is basically protected from any shooting whatsoever. And the last but not least are the Eliminators. They are one of my favorite units from the Codex Space Marines, and now I'll tell you why. They are basically Primaris snipers that cost 75 points for unit of 3 with sniper rifles, or 90 points for unit of 3 with las fusils that are basically sort of modified lightweight las cannon. Nowadays, I think the las fusils are the better choice of the two because of all those bodyguard rules that are present in many of the codexes. The sacristans of the sisters, the lich guard from the Necron codex, the death shrouds of the death guard, and so on and so forth. So it's very hard to actually target the characters that the opponent really cares about. So instead, I think it's better to use the Eliminators as an anti-tank platform. And they can do quite a lot for you in that area. Each squad kick out 3 shots at ballistic skill 2+, at strength 8, AP 3 or 4 in Devastator Doctrine, and damage flat 3, with 36 inches of range. Their guns are heavy, so you will be suffering -1 to hit for moving and shooting, but for the most of the game they will be just sitting tight on an objective or somewhere in a ruin and not moving at all. Their profile is a great one against almost anything: vehicles, heavy infantry, you name it. They have 1-up save and cover thanks to their camo cloak abilities, and it means that any weapon that has, for example, AP3 like a las cannon will only put them on a 4-up save. They also have access to 1 command point, our favorite stratagem from the Spaceman Codex Transhuman Physiology, and the 1 command point Phobos stratagem Guerrilla Tactics to put them in reserves, and then in your next movement phase you can pull them out of the strategic reserves wherever you want them. You can only have up to 9 of these guys in your Space Marine army unless you're playing Death Watch, where you can put them in a Phobos kill team and have up to whatever amount you want of Eliminators, but it will cost you a lot because you will be paying the tax of the Infiltrator Squad. Each Phobos kill team must have at least 5 infiltrators before you can put a single Eliminator there. So having 9 models, 9 primary snipers with the las fusils in your army is a great starter for your anti-tank platform. It probably won't be enough for all of the purposes, but it's a great start, and if you add a couple of dreadnoughts to that, that should be enough to deal with most of the things in terms of the anti-tank firepower. If you decide to go for the sniper rifles, I think the best chapters for these guys are the Raven Guard, because you will be getting that +1 to wound against characters in the Tactical Doctrine, and you will have -1 to hit whenever you are in cover and you want to be in cover with Eliminators to gain the benefit of the Camo Cloak. The Iron Hands are a great chapter for them as well, because you will be ignoring penalty for moving and shooting with the heavy weapons on your first turn, and that's usually when you need to move because you need to get them into position, and after that they will be probably sitting tight for the rest of the game. The 6-up shrug or 5-up shrug for 1 command point is also a great thing to have for their survivability. And the Eliminators are, I think, also not bad for the Eliminators because of their Salamander reroll. For such a low model unit, the Salamander reroll is a perfect buff because you will only have 3 shots, so there is a great chance that you will wound with 2 of those, and you will have that single reroll to reroll the third one that didn't wound initially. Of course, the ignore -1 AP ability will most likely be wasted on the Eliminators with their 1-up save, but when they are getting into position, maybe you have not started the game in cover for some reason, it may also help them. So that's it, guys. I hope you like this video, and if you have suggestions for your favorite strong and underrated units from the Codex Space Marines, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.